Based on the comments, it seems like you guys have really enjoyed our philosophy videos lately. So let's continue this. So I figured why not talk about it some more, because this is something that I've really focused on over the last year. And it's something that Alex, my partner in macro ops, he's focused on for the past 3 years. In fact, as you know, he just came back from a 30-day silent meditation, which is a lot. And you discover a lot about yourself during that time. And we can call it philosophy, but honestly, it's deeper than that. It's psychology, it's just mental health, it's physical health, it's everything. It's a better way to live life, which is why Alex and I have been focusing on it so much. I can guarantee you it's more important than the stock market, it's more important than money, and it does in fact affect everything that you do. So maybe we'll do one of these philosophy videos every Sunday. And as always, comment down below with your thoughts. But today what I want to talk about is attachment. Now, some of you have been with me a long time, and you may remember back in 2018 when I started talking about Buddhism. That's when I first kind of discovered what it actually meant. Now, one of the things in Buddhism, and it kind of bleeds over into Stoicism too, which I learned about years before that and started trying to practice, but it's the idea of attachments. So the Buddhists would say that you shouldn't be attached to anything. Not money, not relationships, not even like your own kids. Now, when I first read about this, I was a bit confused because, attachments are kind of important, at least to the people that you love. Otherwise, what's the point? Well, that's the thing with reading about this stuff in books. They don't always have the best explanation. And actually, the funny thing is that once you actually learn what they mean and you go back and read the explanation, you're like, yeah, this makes perfect sense. But a lot of times the books don't get you from not knowing anything to knowing what they want you to know. So it's difficult to explain it. But in the last year or so, I learned more about what attachment actually means and what do these Buddhists mean when they say you shouldn't be attached to anything. So not being attached to anything does not mean that you're detached from everything, even though that's what it sounds like, and that's what I started to do after, I misinterpreted what it was saying. So no, you don't just cut off your emotions, you don't become a robot. Not being attached to anything means that you are completely self-sufficient in the sense that you have self-worth. So you don't need any external inputs to make yourself feel valuable. In simple terms, not being attached to anything means that you are completely happy and satisfied just sitting on a couch by yourself. And that is easier said than done. You can say, oh yeah, I have self-worth, I like myself. But then when you review your actions, you wonder, oh, why did I do that? Oh, was it to prove something to someone, or what am I doing? What attachments do I actually have that force me to take that action? Versus what I think that, I'm completely fine and I have self-worth. And as you'll see in this video and in future videos, we could talk about this stuff, you could think about it, but it doesn't really sink in unless you do something specific, which you'll also be able to do. But it's good to have this overall structure too. So not having attachments means that you feel self-worth, right? You are completely fine by yourself. That doesn't mean that you don't have relationships and that you don't have people that you love. It doesn't mean that you literally just don't do anything and just sit on a couch. You can still have goals and all of that. But let me run through a few examples of unhealthy attachment. Let's start with relationships. And man, in the past few years, I have realized how many dysfunctional relationships there are. I would say that a majority of relationships are actually dysfunctional if you're viewing them through this lens. But let's start with a really simple example, like a jealous boyfriend who wants complete control over their partner. They want to know what they're doing all the time, when they go out, when they're coming back, if they're even allowed to go out. And you know the type of relationship I'm talking about. That obviously unhealthy attachment. That particular boyfriend does not feel self-worth, and that's why he acts the way he does towards his partner. Now, a little more complex example is parents and their children. So what do parents want for their children? At least good parents. They want them to be safe, right? But that can lead to overbearing parents. And again, you know the cliche relationship here as well. You have parents that just keep blocking their kids even as these kids are fully grown in their 20s and 30s. And it becomes a dysfunctional relationship. And that's because the parents have that unhealthy attachment to their kids. We could even talk about friendships. Say you're in high school and your best buddy makes the basketball team. And you're happy for him because your buddy wanted to be on the basketball team his whole life. But now what happens? Now that he's on the team, he's got to go practice. And now he has new friends. And now he's all wrapped up in the basketball community. And now he doesn't have as much time as he previously did for you. Now, what normally happens in a situation like this? You, who were originally happy for your friend for making the basketball team, all of a sudden starts to turn bitter. You start to accuse that friend of saying like, hey man, you changed. You're not the same guy I thought you were. And eventually, instead of enjoying the little bit of time that you have with that friend, you end up disliking him. And you're not friends friends anymore. And yeah, that's an example in high school, but how many times does that happen even in your adult life? When they say in these self-help books that your relationships are going to be strained as you continue to evolve or try to do something different than what your community does, that's true. And the reason why is because the people around you may not feel that self-worth. They might be attached to a certain way that you were, and now that you're a bit different, even though it's better for you, and they could see it's better for you, they don't like that. Meaning that they have an unhealthy attachment to a particular version of you. And that's when you start getting accused of changing, and you aren't the same, you aren't who I thought you were. If both people weren't attached to these types of relationships, and when I say attachment, again, it means in an unhealthy way, then both would have enough self-worth to go on their different paths and be okay with it, and be happy with the time that they spent together, and understand that in the future they might come back together. But it's a much healthier approach than what usually happens. And these were just a few examples, but you know so many relationships fall apart or become very strained, especially within families and friends. And most, if not all of it, can be traced back to this idea of attachment. And again, if everybody in the magical world all felt that self-worth and didn't have the attachments, we'd all be much better off. Now, another way to look at attachments is within your work, or even the stock market, for example. In our society, we are encouraged to set goals. We say, hey, in 5 years, I'm going to be here. In 10 years, I'm going to be here. Or even shorter term goals. By the end of this year, I want to be making this much money, or I want to get this promotion, or whatever it is. The problem, though, and the thing that they don't teach you in this Western society, is how to not get attached to those goals. Because a lot of us, especially us type A people, we feel like we're failing the entire time until we reach that goal. And then once we reach that goal, okay, we're happy for 5 minutes, and then we're on to the next goal. So you're on a hamster wheel and you're never satisfied, and you just burn yourself out and you're miserable. That is most Americans. And that's if you're actually able to achieve the goal that you set. The times when you don't achieve the goal, it's even worse. So that's once again an unhealthy form of attachment, because you're saying, I need this thing to be happy. Because that's the goal for all of us, right? Just to be happy. All these things like money and relationships, they're just a means to be happy. But if you're always saying, I need this to be happy, something that I don't have, you're going to be miserable. That's why so many super rich people are miserable. So many high performing people are miserable, because you're attached to that external thing once again, as opposed to feeling the self-worth in which you don't really need anything to be happy. It's all contained on the inside. So now does that mean you don't set goals and you don't do anything? No, there's a healthy way to do it. Just like when we were talking about relationships, the healthy way to approach it is that you know things will ebb and flow, and that you're not attached to a certain configuration of a relationship. That's the healthy way to operate there. And the healthy way to operate when it comes to goals is to, sure, set a goal, but don't be attached to that outcome. So me personally, the way I've been doing it is that instead of setting those goals and saying, hey, I want to hit this benchmark by this time, which I know is encouraged in so many books, what gets measured gets managed. Instead, I focus on the actual process that I'm doing. So for example, even this video that you're watching right now, me rambling about philosophy and these things. Is this related to the market? Kind of. In a really roundabout way. Is this going to make me any more money? No. Is this going to grow my subscribers? No. Is this going to accomplish my business goals? No. But instead of focusing on that, what I've been focusing on is what type of video would I like to make? What do I think would be useful to people that is also useful to me? What is a process that I can enjoy? And that's how this video and hopefully future videos are going to be made. So my goal isn't gain this many subscribers by this point. My goal is that in the video that I'm making today and the video that I'm making tomorrow, am I enjoying that process? That's my real goal. And yeah, I know that's scary to think about, because when you hear success stories, it seems like people planned a lot of it out. It's like, I had this goal to be the best in the world and then I became it. Okay, yeah, that's great, but there's a ton of stories of people who seem to fall ass backwards into things too. And I will say those people who seem to have fallen into something, they seem a lot happier. And that's because it seems like they weren't attached to that long-term goal. They weren't attached to the idea that they were going to start at point A and end at point Z. Instead, they were more letting their curiosity drive them. So a good example of that is actually Joe Rogan, which regardless how you feel about him, he's a very successful guy. And he's a smart guy too, but you should hear the story about how he got into these things that are so successful now. For example, podcasting. When he started podcasting, everyone was like, what are you doing? Why are you carrying this mic around? You want to put me on this thing? You want to record me, our conversation? All right, fine, dude, do what you want. And it was like that for a long time, because this was back in the early days of podcasting, and now look at him. But did he really know that podcasting was going to take off? No, he never even thought about that. If you listen to interviews, he says he was just having a good time with his friends. He just wanted to talk to his friends and record it. That's it. No long-term goal, no idea that, hey, I'm going to be here in 20 years. I gotta be. He was not attached to anything. His only goal really was just having fun. Same thing happened with the UFC. In the beginning, Joe Rogan, he always liked fighting. But back in the early days of the UFC, they were like, hey, do you want to announce this? And then he'd fly out to the middle of like Kentucky in someone's backyard basically, and he's sitting there and announcing this fight or commentating, whatever you want to call it, and his friends would be like, yo, what are you doing? Like, why are you going to this dude's backyard in Kentucky? And Joe Rogan's response was like, hey, I just like it. And he kept doing it. He literally spent his own money to fly to all these places. And now look at the UFC and look at his position in it. Once again, was that planned out? According to him, no. He was just following his curiosity. He was focused on the process. What do I enjoy doing and what do I want to do better? He's definitely gotten better over time, but that's because he loves it. It's not because he wanted to make X amount of money, or it's not because he wanted to be like the best announcer or the best podcaster or anything like that. He just enjoyed it. So when it comes to goal setting, instead of setting a long-term goal like I used to do and getting attached to that outcome, I just set a goal of what process am I doing right now and how do I make it more enjoyable? And if I want to improve something, it's because I'm curious about how far I can take it and I'm enjoying myself. It's not money or status related anymore, because those are just unhealthy attachments to outcomes. Now, that's obviously easier said than done, and how can you trust just following your passion, which sounds really stupid, is going to make any money? And even going back to relationships and attachments there, once again, easier said than done. So the reason that these attachments happen, and we only talked about two examples, we talked about relationships and say like career goals. But these attachments are everywhere. And the reason they happen and the reason they're so hard to get rid of is because of fear. And I'm not just talking about like the fear of failure or these surface level fears. These are deep rooted fears that you don't necessarily see that end up driving your decisions, even when you think they're rational. These fears are the definition of blind spots. And fear is driving so many of us. And it's very difficult to get rid of. But we're going to talk more about it and of course eventually how to get rid of these fears in a future video. So hopefully you guys like this discussion, but I probably rambled too much. But this is the more surface level stuff, even though it's important, and we're going to continue to get deeper. So make sure you subscribe if you like it. Actually, I don't even know if subscribing does anything anymore. But comment down below so we have a discussion. And I will see you in the next video.